Welcome to the Gottesdienst crowd, where we foster confessional integrity, liturgical preservation, and preaching that doesn't stink. We believe that the historic liturgy of the divine service is more than mere cobwebs of antiquity, but it is a true treasure of the Church, to be dusted off and brought down from her attic to be enjoyed. So let's get dusting. Welcome back to the Gottesdienst crowd. This is Jason Braaten, your host. Today we have with us a special guest, really a once and only time guest, my sister-in-law, Adriane Heins. She is the former editor of the Lutheran Witness magazine. She is the wife of Chris Heins, my brother-in-law, and the mother of 4 children, my niece and nephews in Missouri, who call me, without any coercion whatsoever, Uncle Awesome. Welcome for the first and only time to the Gottesdienst crowd, Adriane.
Thank you for not saying Adriane Dorr Heins.
Oh, yeah, you're welcome.
Which most people do, and then I have to clarify. So good work.
Yeah, you're welcome. So anyway, but I still got it in there, you know?
You did, but not hyphenated, so that's okay.
Good. So what I wanted you to come on the show as a first and only, really because, so I got off Facebook probably just before the election. I just was tired of seeing people who thought they knew things type things as though they knew things. And so the problem is, right, that the people that I live with, your sister, my wife, is still on Facebook. And so I get shared with all the things that are happening on Facebook.
So you're not off Facebook.
So technically I'm not off Facebook. The point is, there has been, like in the blogosphere, I think that as there always is, it's like we're constantly breathing this poisoned air from the world, like a resurgence within the Missouri Synod. Maybe it's not even resurgence, but just perhaps maybe in our circles, confessional Lutheran circles, let's put it that way, of, kind of this raising up of the feminist flag, so to speak. So what I want to talk with you about today is like just how persuasive and pervasive is feminism, like to the point where we don't actually even know or recognize within ourselves some of those kind of feministic qualities that have just been ingrained in us because we breathe the same poisoned air.
I think that you're onto something. Part of it is that I believe we have this sort of quaint view in the church that feminism isn't really all that bad, that it's just kind of that 1950s, anything you can do, I can do better. Women can be anything they want to be. It's really not understood to be something that is actually harmful. It's a sort of, like I said, a quaint view. And so when we define it that way, it's very easy for women to say, this isn't a bad thing. If we understand feminism to be what it actually is, that it is something harmful, that it does pit men and women against each other, that it has brought us really nothing good, no-fault divorce and abortion on demand and all sorts of horrible things like that, it becomes a much bigger issue. So we see this resurgence in part because people don't actually understand it, in part because I don't want to throw men under the bus, but because it feels on my side of things like men aren't speaking against it, and because we as women honestly somewhat believe it. We believe that we're equal, that all things have to be equal, instead of understanding that there can and should be complementary roles, that there is an order to creation, that on the whole, for the most part, with a couple of exceptions being obvious, there's a way that men, women, children live and work together, that for centuries, for thousands of years, husbands have left and done the hard work of going to work. It's enabled women to stay home and do the hard work of caring for the children. So to me, it's one of those things where it's easy for us as women to think we're unique in that sense. And we are in need of a church who is strong enough to say, let's step back from this and see it for what it really is, not something sort of cute and not dangerous, but as something that can actually really be harmful to the family, to marriages, to the way that we're raising our children, to the way that we're raising future generations. And I saw that myself among women when I worked at the Lutheran Witness. I would get a lot of requests to come and speak for women's groups, and they would email and say, can you come and talk about the Psalms? And I would say, I'm not qualified to do that, but here are 4 pastors who have made their life studying the Psalms. You should talk to them. Well, we don't really want that. We want a woman to come and speak to us. Well, why? Shouldn't you want the person who actually knows the Psalms to come and speak to you? I could make something up, but that's not going to be helpful to you. It creeps in little ways like that. It creeps in how men and women interact at the seminaries. It creeps in how we talk to our young women about what they're going to be doing in life as they grow up and leave home. When we say to them, what are you going to do after college? What job are you seeing yourself at in 10 years? When's the last time you've ever heard somebody say, you're going to college? Okay, that's great. Do you see yourself staying at home with your children after that? Do you see yourself using your gifts and talents to care for the people around you through your home? We don't have conversations like that anymore. So it's subtle and it creeps. And we, as the church, are really uniquely suited to stand up and say, no, there is actually a specific role for men, and there is a specific role for women, and how they relate to each other and how they relate to their children. And I don't see that happening much.
Yeah, and I appreciate the kind of way you talked about role. Sometimes we can speak about it in terms of like a calling, like what's the vocation of woman? What's the vocation of man? What does God actually call a woman to do? And what does God actually call a man to do? Instead of thinking, and perhaps this is where feminism, or even just sin in general, comes into play. What do you want to do? So it's automatically putting you at the center instead of what does God call you to do? How are you to be a sacrifice of yourself for others? And when that focus kind of gets disjointed, it's no longer biblically centered, right? It's no longer, let's just say it's not Christian anymore, right? So how do you think the best way to, maybe this is a poor choice of words now, but inoculate our people against those things? Like, this is obviously culturally against the stream. This is culturally not the norm to speak of. A woman is called by God to do certain things, right? To be a wife, to be a mother. That is the highest calling of a woman. The highest calling of a man is to be a husband and a father. And then within those things, to fill out those roles in the best manner in which they can. So how do we begin to, walk back, find our roots, so to speak?
I should say I was raised, this is a bit of a precursor to answering your question, but I was raised in a household, as your wife was, since she's my sister, where our parents told us frequently that the most noble thing we could do would be to be a godly wife and a mom. And without it being said, that would be following our mom's example, who stayed at home and raised us. So I came at this whole understanding probably right of where most people already are. And I still bristled as I worked through this, because there were still things that were jarring and chafed for me to come to an understanding of what God intends for men and what he intends for women. So there were things that I would hear at the seminary that would bug me and gnaw at me. And so you think of most people who aren't even coming from a home in which this is actively taught. Think of how far they're going to have to swing to be able to understand this. So for me, it took a lot of actually being willing to listen to the people who bugged me with what they said, because it's very easy to dismiss someone, especially in this day and age, and especially in social media. Well, I'm not going to have that conversation with you, which is what everybody always says when they don't like something that someone else says. But you may actually have to put in the work and read the scriptures and read some of these things, some of the people who are frustrating you with what they're saying, and actually dig into that and be willing to listen. It means having pastors who are actually willing to have these hard conversations. It means women who do understand to the best that we can what it means to be a woman, being willing to talk about these things with other younger women. I would go and speak to women's groups about some of these issues, and the women would come out of the woodwork afterwards, coming up to me and saying, I had no idea. I never thought about the fact that I could have stayed home and raised my children, that I could have been helping my widowed neighbor next door by taking them a meal or X, Y, and Z. It was like this thought had never even crossed their mind, and it grieved them. So we think we're doing this great service to women by saying, you can go and be and do anything you want to be. And you look at women in their later years who are looking back on their life and saying, I regret this. The thing I wanted to do the most, I bought into that lie not to do it. And now I have to deal with all of these issues as I'm aging, what that meant for my husband, what that meant for my children, our family as a whole. So it's going to actually take us being brave enough to talk about it, which means we're actually going to have to believe it. That big picture, there is an order to how this works. We're going to have to be willing to, I would say normalize, but re-normalize the fact that it is okay for a young woman to say, I want to get married and stay home with my children, and not to look at them like that's weird. I was talking with my husband about this last night, and I said, one of the things, I think probably our third date, he said to me, kind of, you're still getting to know each other. Where do you see yourself once you're married? And I said, I intend to be a stay-at-home mom. And he said, that's perfect. That's a non-negotiable for me. No one had ever said that before. I had dated several guys, several of them seminarians, who would say, that's fine if that's your choice, but I would never tell you that that's the right thing to do for you. Well, maybe you should. Maybe you should say, we would not be worse off if more women chose to care for their home and care for their family. So when I say re-normalize, I think that we had this for a time, and that feminism obviously is the thing that's sort of crumbled that. And we need to work again to say, these are good things, and add that to our vocabulary. How many people, when I quit my job at the Lutheran Witness, said, oh, so you're stepping down. This is such a shame. And, are you sure this is going to be challenging enough to just be a mom? Well, I have 4 kids under the age of 5. It's challenging enough. It is 100% challenging enough. But that's the way it was spoken about. And so you go into it already with this bias against the fact that you're going to be using the gifts and talents and perhaps education and perhaps work experience and all these things you've had to the betterment of your family and your children. But the church and the world still views that as like a B team job.
Yeah.
Like, well,
it's a waste.
Right. Yep. That's too bad. You're doing that. So it's gonna actually have to take us as women being honest with ourselves, doing the hard work of actually understanding it. And we need you men to actually be brave enough to talk about it too.
Yeah, I kind of caught a bit of a sense that perhaps we are enduring kind of the pervasiveness and persuasiveness of feminism in what you were saying is because men have kind of given up. Like they've just totally folded.
Right.
So in what ways should men stand up? I mean, just, as boldly as possible. I mean,
It
I'm all for the boldly as possible, but
it won't hurt.
I'm just curious.
I remember hearing, when I was working at the Lutheran Witness, I remember hearing a pastor talking to a group of his friends at an event I was at. And he said to someone, well, she's not getting married. She's burying her womb in the earth, which annoyed me at the time because I wanted nothing more than to be married and have children. So I was more annoyed that he thought I was purposefully not getting married. But again, big picture, he wasn't exactly wrong. When do you hear anyone speak like that? When do you hear someone say, why is this person not getting married? What can we do to encourage this person in this very noble estate? We don't do that. We talk about their job. We talk about what's your dream career. We talk about all the other things that really don't matter because we're so fearful of stepping on toes. And I started to feel this even at the seminary. I got my master's degree. I loved my time there. I grew as a Lutheran. It was such a formative experience for me. But even there, it started to feel off because you would be sitting in a class of all men and there'd be a couple deaconess students and me. I remember one instance clearly. And Dr. David Scare made a joke about Lutheranism being like lead in the blood. And you know how the line ends. And the two other women got up and left the room crying. And all the men are laughing because they get what he's getting at. And then it got awkwardly silent because these two girls leave sobbing. And I wanted to stand up and just apologize on behalf of women everywhere because we all knew what he meant. But it screwed up the whole teachable moment because they were having a moment, right? So it's one of those things where men have to be brave enough to say, no, this is what he's saying is still right and good. You can cry about this. We can work that out later, but this is still a good and teachable moment. So I think that there's ways in which men feel like they need to pull back because that's men are problem solvers, you're protectors, you're all of those things. But problem solve and protect us in healthy, productive ways, not to make us feel better, but to make us know the truth.
Yeah. No, I think that's helpful. I mean, just don't be bashful and just be bold. And because that's what make men, right? And if need be, if we said something too harshly, you can always confess later, but better to be upfront and honest and truthful than, covering things up and not being completely forthright.
Or the woman, as we are wont to do, we get our feelings hurt. So then you have a chance for another discussion. So then she gets to come and talk to her pastor or whomever and say, this doesn't make sense. This bugs me. Great. Let's sit down and work through that some more. There's no harm in that. There's no harm in having to work through that. Yeah.
So how, just how pervasive do you think it really is? Particularly within, let's say, the men of the church. Do you think it's really kind of gotten to the root where it's kind of made, well, what's the term they use today? Soy boys, right?
Yes.
Right. That just kind of lack vigor. Pajama boy, is that the term also?
Right.
Just kind of not quite got enough gumption to move forward.
Pretty
not
pervasive.
A whole lot of get up and go.
Pretty pervasive. Yeah. And sadly, I think it's pervasive among pastors and your favorite term at Gottesdienst, church workers, because I have been on the receiving end.
Rostered church workers, please.
Yes, my apologies. Get it right. I have been on the receiving end of so many of those comments. When my husband Chris and I were engaged, a district president said to me, so is Chris going to move to St. Louis? Are you going to move to the farm? Are you going to stay in St. Louis and he's going to come visit? And I probably looked like he had sprouted a third eye because I was thinking, we've never even had this discussion. Like, he's going to sell the farm so that I can keep correcting people's split infinitives. This is not, no, this isn't even a discussion. So it seems to me, just based on my own experience and the things that I've been told, that it is pervasive in our churches, in our seminaries, all of these places, and the culture continues to feed that lie, and so no one is willing to stand up and start saying no, or if they are, then you're just going to get labeled a misogynist or something horrible. No one's going to be willing to actually listen to you. So that becomes a bigger issue where we just pick and choose what we like about our theology. But I mean, was it Dr. Kleinig who said, all women actually are interested in alpha males? There's a part of us that actually wants you to tell us that these things are good and that they're okay and that it's normal to actually want to get married and to have babies.
So, the big narrative that goes along with kind of the feminist movement is, which we've already touched on a little bit, is that you're giving up so much, right? You're wasting all of your talents. Do you find what you did at correcting split infinitives, editing, more stimulating and more occupying of your time, more difficult than you do raising 5 children and making a house and a home for your husband?
It was not more difficult. It was a walk in the park. And I think that is part of it too. I was recounting to my husband how one time I went to the doctor's office and this nice gentleman's filling out the paperwork for me. And he says, so what's your occupation? What do you do? Which is the question we always ask. We never say, oh, are you married? Do you have children? It's always, so what do you do for a living? And I said, I'm a homemaker. And he said, oh, so you do nothing? And I thought, oh, actually, no, I've done a lot of things today. But that sort of mentality is as common among us as Lutherans as it is among the nice gentleman at the doctor's office. Yeah. So it is hard work to raise children. There are days when I would love to be able to see the fruits of your labor, right? If you're editing a magazine, you can see it to completion. Someone says, hey, this was actually really helpful, or this article was really good. And okay, this turned out the way that it was supposed to. You don't get that when you're raising children under the age of 5. On the whole, they're crabby with you because you're the safe mom that they can be crabby and test all the boundaries with. So there are days when it would be a lot easier to drop them off at grandma's and to go do whatever it is I want to do. But having been raised by the parents I was raised by, instead, I think, well, we're just going to lean in and embrace the difficulty more and just keep at this. Yeah. So
embrace the suck.
Yes, for sure. On the days when everything is going wrong, why ask for help? Just try harder. So it's sad to me because I think especially there's a place for older women in the church to speak to these issues. We have women who are of an age that they remember when moms were home with their children and what that looked like. And there's a part of them that wants that still, but they see their children having chosen a different route and their grandchildren choosing, in a lot of senses, a crazier route still than that. And they can't bring themselves to say there was something good about the order that I was raised with. So I see women in their 70s and 80s talking about their grandchildren moving in, their granddaughter moving in with her boyfriend because it was easier during COVID, and that's okay. But she will look at Chris and me and say, it's so good what you're doing, that you're home and you're raising those kids. That's such noble work. We have that written in us. God, the scriptures say God puts the solitary into families. The family has something unique to it, and people recognize that and have a longing for that. But there is also a great need to be able to be strong enough to actually do it. And that's why we're such an anomaly in a sense. I mean, it's like you're getting ready to go on vacation and you're like thawing chicken in the fridge and you're not dealing with it because you're getting ready to go on vacation. The meat is rotting, but you can't really tell. And you get back from vacation and it's like green and it stinks. We're getting to the point where it's green and stinking and we're going to have to deal with it. because
Yeah.
there's so many trickle down effects that are being had. And we've been okay with it to a certain point, and now we're starting to see how this all plays out. And someone's going to have to start saying, we got to toss out the rotten meat. So
Yeah, I mean, you had just said, having gone to the doctor's office, what do you do? Homemaker. And the guy asking the questionnaire says, so you do nothing. It seems like we need a opposite kind of boldness. I mean, that's a bold statement.
Right.
I mean, kind of jerkish.
Right.
Actually.
Yeah.
To say we need on kind of our side, God's order side, to begin to say things just as boldly, to say, yeah, no, you're actually wrong. And it's actually better for these things to happen. The highest calling of a woman is to be a wife and a mother, period. End of discussion.
Put that on my medical form, buddy.
There you go.
Yeah. There's that great line from Dr. Esselin when he says, we talk about stay-at-home moms like it's this mundane stick in the mud thing. He's like, why don't we call them languishing in meetings moms? How come the stay-at-home mom has the connotation of like, she's the dud.
Or the scraping off plaque of strangers that you hardly know and do not love.
Right.
Yeah, that sounds like great fun.
Right. Exactly. Yes.
And I just got my teeth cleaned, and I was thinking about that the whole time.
Every time you go to the dentist now.
Yeah, it's ruined for me.
It is interesting because a friend of mine just gave me a book by Carrie Gress of the recent flyover women fame, that article in the Federalist. And she's written a book called Theology of the Home. And she's Roman Catholic, so I'm sure that they mess it up. But
we call them papists on this show.
Oh, sorry. We'll have to edit that part out.
Okay.
But I'm interested to read that because Lutherans do have such an opportunity to speak beautifully and well to these things about the home and why the home matters. I would love to see someone work on that. So in all of your spare time, Goddess Beans editors, if you could write the theology of the home as understood by the father/husband, please do. Yeah,
we'll get right on that. I mean, since we're kind of liturgy people.
If I become a patron, will that get me a series of blog posts on this subject? I'd be willing to sign up for that.
Yes, by the way, if
thought I'd help you with that.
If you'd like to become a patron, go to www.patreon.com/goddessdienst. Do you have any final thoughts? I mean, it sounds like we kind of discussed how pervasive, how persuasive it is, why it is those things. Really, the only thing to do is to counteract it and to do so boldly. I mean, it's kind of like the, Jocko thing. Like, how do I get up early in the morning? Well, this is what you do. You set your alarm clock for early, and then when it goes off, you get up. Right? It's like you just have to do it. There's no silver bullet. There's no
excuses.
There's no sweatless solutions. It's just you got to do it and take the punches on the chin. Any final thoughts? I mean, any encouragement for our listeners?
I would say, and again, my husband and I were talking about this last night, and he obviously gave me permission to share this. So I'm not saying something out of turn here, but he was saying how when we first got married, it was difficult for him to step into the spiritual head of the household role because I had gone to the seminary, and he felt like, well, she's been and she knows this. How am I going to fill this gap? And he said, it took time, but the great thing was you refused to step into the void. You refused to be the spiritual head of the household. So I had to do the work of reading and studying and listening to the Goddess Beans Crowd podcast so that I could be up to speed, so that I could lead our family. So part of our job as women is not to step into the void. When we see the areas where things are lacking or where men perhaps are not being brave enough to say those things, it doesn't mean we jump past that and do it, but we can encourage and we can ask for those things. And sometimes by refusing to do a thing, the thing actually occurs. Mm-hmm. So it's one of those cases where again, it's difficult. It can be trying, but the outcome is beautiful. Now he comes in at lunch and is like, "Did you hear Pastor Bean's podcast? It was amazing." I'm like, "No, I've been mopping the floor and changing diapers. There's been no podcast listening to here." But he's taken it and run with it. And it's been a wonderful, amazing thing to see what that has done for him as a faithful Lutheran by having to work at that. So my encouragement for us as women is to get back to telling women it's okay and it's good to stay home and to raise your babies. My encouragement to men, same thing. And, it was not that long ago. I mean, the other day I heard a commercial from the 1950s, probably late 40s, because it was about World War II. And it was a commercial by the government saying, "Homemakers, you have the most important job right now. You're taking care of the children while the men are gone to war. You're raising your gardens. You're looking out for your neighbors next door. You're doing all of these things. You are vital to who we are as a country." That was not that long ago. And that was a government saying that was a good thing. How much more can we as the church boldly speak to those issues?
75 years ago.
Right. There's nothing to fear. So we have some angry women who get their feelings hurt, but actually have to work through why this is harmful. That's a good thing.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your time this evening. I'll let you get back to
folding clothes.
Being barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen. No, wait, that's not what it is, right?
Oh, right.
I'm just kidding. I'll let you get back to your husband and your kids, and I appreciate your time. And hey, look forward to seeing you, not on here again, but, whenever you guys come back up or we come back down.
Sounds like a plan. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Thanks.